Starting.
There we
Hello,
go.
everyone. The Eternal Life Fan Club is interviewing today the author and illustrator of Death is Wrong, Gennady and Wendy Stolyarov. Am I saying your last name right? Stolyarov?
Yeah, that time.
All right, cool. So these are the people that I asked to participate in the Ice Bucket Challenge. I challenged them, and they actually accepted, and I was very pleased with their response. Thank you guys very much for doing that awesome video.
Certainly. Well, we're always happy to assist with life-saving research. And
Eternal Life Fan Club is... Sorry, what's going on? Today, the author and illustrator of Death is
I'm
Wrong.
playing back on you.
Gennady and Wendy Stolyarov. What is going on? Wait a second.
We're in a time loop.
Alright, cool. What is going on here? What is going on? That is so weird. Okay. Oh, it had it opened in another page. Okay, sorry about that. Shouldn't do that anymore.
Okay.
All right, so yeah, as you were saying?
yes, well, we're always happy to support life-saving research, and we figured since the terms of the Ice Bucket Challenge are either donate $10 and have a bucket of ice water dumped onto you, or donate $100 and not have that happen, we could make a bigger impact by not having that happen.
Yes, and Gennady, as you may observe, is not exactly an icy kind of person. Far too dignified. He wouldn't want to ruin his suit. So.
Awesome. So, I'm just going to start off by, most of the Eternal Life fans are probably well aware of your book, but for the viewers that aren't familiar, just give a brief description of your intentions for writing the book, what gave you the idea, what sparked this interest to write this book about Death is Wrong. And for everyone watching here, Death is Wrong is really about how Gennady, as a young kid, he was very afraid of dying. I mean, as soon as he learned about the idea, he's like, no, death is wrong. It reminds me of myself, you know, when I learned about death. So yeah, go on.
Certainly. And I think your reaction when you learned about death and my reaction when I learned about death are not that atypical for young kids who are first introduced to this grim prospect. The fact is, most kids recognize that it's not just, it's not right for a good person to have his or her existence just ended without that person having done something egregiously wrong. And so there is this visceral outrage that young kids experience. Unfortunately, almost immediately afterward, adults try to talk them out of it. They concoct a bunch of rationalizations, essentially saying, well, death is normal and natural, it's somehow cosmically good, or at the very least, adults will say, it's inevitable that it'll happen to you some days, but it might not be soon, so put it out of your mind and enjoy life. And that spectrum of responses, unfortunately, has a very dangerous effect of discouraging kids from pursuing solutions to this greatest of all problems, the problem of human mortality. If they didn't have these rationalizations for death, then they might be more determined to do something about this problem, to pursue scientific research, to pursue activism, to get humankind on board with this great project. So this is why I decided to write the book. I wanted to fill this void of information and arguments in favor of life extension. And Wendy and I have talked about writing a children's book for some time.
It was a fusion of our interests. During college, I would teach at a Montessori academy during the summer, and I'd always been interested in illustrating a children's book, and Gennady found this gap in the life extension marketplace of ideas, so we thought it'd be a good way to fuse our interests.
It's awesome. I love your illustrations, by the way. I mean, I think the cover is just so perfect. It's like him pointing at death and, like, you know,
saying, like, go, go.
Yeah, Exactly, banishing death, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly.
And it has the pictures have a sort of a very eerie kind of feel, and like, you know, scary, which it should be scary. Death is super scary, so I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and for those of you who've seen, I've been passing out the book Death is Wrong to kids. So far, I passed out 5 or 6 of them. Actually, I have 3 that I haven't actually released the video for.
Awesome.
But it's been very interesting, you know, trying to convince parents. A lot of parents are, when I tell them, you know, like, would you want your kid to read this book? It's about, you know, teaching them that they can actually live forever, that death isn't necessarily inevitable if we cure aging. And it's very interesting to hear their reactions, because a lot of parents act like they don't want their kids to view death as a negative thing, because then the kids would be viewing the parents' death as a negative thing, and the parents they're like preparing for their own death, and they don't want the children to think that, oh, my mother and father's died, it's this horrible thing, you know, but it's just reality. It is a horrible thing.
I think it's also something of a cycle of abuse. I'm not saying that parents who teach their children that death is okay or just don't say anything on the subject are abusive. I don't think that's the case. But it's like people who were spanked growing up tend to advocate spanking their own children a lot more than people who weren't spanked growing up. And I think a lot of the time they're even thinking about the possibility of their own children dying. And if that happens, you know, it's a tragedy, absolutely, in every case. But it's even more of a tragedy if you think about death as something fixable, because you missed the boat, you know, you missed your opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a terrifying prospect, I think. And a lot of parents are more comfortable with just skipping the talk about death with their children, or doing the easy way out, which is, oh, it's natural, and it's always going to be that way. So.
Yes. I'll add that, in fact, the prospect of missing the boat should be something that motivates people to get indefinite life extension accomplished sooner, because really technology is going to continue to progress unless we have some serious cataclysms like a world war or a meteor hitting the Earth and obliterating most sentient life. But barring that, progress will continue. The question is, what rate will that progress take, and will it be in time for us? So my goal with this book is to accelerate the coming of that day when indefinite longevity will be within reach for the majority of human beings. Hopefully for us, hopefully for the people who are kids today, hopefully for their parents. And it does sadden me that so many people, like the parents you described, essentially have given up already, even though with the accelerating rate of technological progress that we are experiencing, they have a decent chance, by no means a guarantee, but they are lowering their individual probabilities of reaching longevity escape velocity if they oppose or resist the spread of these ideas.
I think a lot of people are afraid to try to do things in case they fail, because if you never try, you're not as disappointed as you are if you try and then do not succeed.
That's a great point. That's a great point. It's almost like I always compare it to the fox and the grapes, Aesop's fable. It's like the sour grapes effect. It's like because they think it's out of their reach, they want to convince themselves that it's not even a good idea to try to live forever. It's like they don't want to be disappointed, like you were saying. It's a very good point.
There's an analogy for this called crabs in a bucket. Have you heard this analogy?
No.
The idea is that if you have a bucket full of crabs, the crabs at the top are actually high enough up that they can probably succeed in climbing out of the bucket and escaping from the terrible fate of being eaten. But the lower crabs grab onto the crabs that are at the top and pull them back down into the bucket so that no crabs escape.
That is very fitting.
Yeah, so it's a crabs in the bucket mentality. And it happens a lot with people who are succeeding or trying to succeed at something unusual. You know?
Absolutely. Like, you know, this back to this crabs in the bucket analogy. It's like I have no problem with if someone wants to die, if they think there's an afterlife, I totally recommend against that. But if that's what they want, that's fine. As long as if they're going to do that, if they're going to accept death on the assumption there's an afterlife, that's their deal. But don't ruin it for all of us who aren't confident at all that there's an afterlife.
Yes.
You know, in fact, if to the religious people, I'd say, if you have like a moral duty to try to help those people who aren't confident that there's an afterlife, to try to like extend the only life we know to exist. I mean, that's how I view it.
Well, there are plenty of non-religious people out there as well who are accepting of death. I wouldn't say that they're excited about their own deaths the way some religious people can be or claim to be. I don't think they're looking forward to it, but there's this strong mentality that death is a natural part of life and that they're taking their place in the cycle, something like that. And I don't believe that it's right to try to coerce those people into extending their own life expectancies. I think it has to be something that individuals choose for themselves. I think that's vital to the health of the movement in the long term. And I think that the mantra should simply be making death optional rather than making life extension mandatory.
Well, I actually don't think anybody in the life extensionist movement today would want to make it mandatory. I think the technology
the technology isn't there yet.
Very new, and it's going to come about unevenly. It's not going to, in the first year that radical life extending treatments are available, they're probably not going to be available in sub-Saharan Africa or, say, in the slums of a large city in India, but maybe they'll eventually be available there, say, in 10 or 20 years thereafter. So the ones who can get it should get it, in my view, but it should be their choice, and it should be determined in a way by the economic opportunities that are available to them. The more people get it, the more the ideas will spread, and the more people will think, this is now possible. Let's try to get it ourselves.
I understand the point.
Definitely. Yeah.
I think it's going to be even a little more uneven and slower, and I think more seductive and gradual than you're describing. I don't think there's ever going to be any one radical life-extending treatment. I think it's going to be a cumulative effect of dozens of different little things. Like, we figured out a way for nanomachines to prevent cells from having errors when they replicate themselves. We figured out a treatment for this kind of cancer. We figured out a treatment for Alzheimer's disease, etc. I don't think there's ever going to be one treatment that people are going to point to and say, oh no, we should be scared of that, it's the immortality pill. I think it's going to be Granny can get this treatment and keep playing with her grandkids for another 20 years. And I think that's going to be a lot more palatable for most people than the sort of thing that you described, some rejuvenation therapy that only the super wealthy can afford.
Well, we, I think, can postulate many ways in which future technological improvements could lead to increased longevity. I myself don't know which path it'll take. I don't think it'll be one pill or one treatment either. I think it would be a series of them, but over time they could become part of a more standard clinical practice. First, it'll be a minority of people embracing it,
Obviously,
and then it'll be an increasingly larger number.
Smaller testing groups to begin with, obviously. But I think it's going to begin in standard clinical practice. I think it has to begin that way. I don't think it'll gain mainstream acceptance if it starts in alternative medicine or as some kind of alternative therapy. I think it needs to come through the medical establishment, and I think it will, because the medical community has been the biggest force behind human life extension in the past 200 years. I mean, figuring out germ theory, figuring out organ transplant, figuring out chemotherapy, figuring out treatments for thousands of different kinds of discrete sicknesses, illnesses, injuries, etc., that keep people on average, alive much longer now than we were 200 years ago. So.
I'd like to comment on something. So, Wendy, you said that we shouldn't like try to coerce people into accepting these treatments. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, I think that if somebody wants to die, it's ultimately their choice. I'm a methodological individualist, which means that I believe that the individual is the primary unit from which decision-making has to emerge. I don't think it's right to try to make somebody live longer than that person chooses to. If somebody chooses not to receive an organ, that's their choice. If somebody chooses not to receive a medical treatment, that's their choice. And it could be a very sad decision. And I would say in almost every case it would be a very sad decision, assuming the person is a horrible person who deserves to die.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It should be their choice. I guess I was questioning what the word coerce means, because I often try to, I could say I try to manipulate people into accepting these ideas, right?
Persuasion is fine, but to force someone into it is what I'm saying.
Right.
It's
unacceptable
to force someone to receive a treatment that they choose not to receive.
Definitely, I agree with that.
The threat of coercion, realistically, it's going to come from the other side, from the people who want to restrict the availability of
I don't think there actually are that many people. I think that you're inventing a
we had, during the Bush administration, the President's Council of Bioethics,
they
people
weren't
on
actually
it like
forcing
Leon
anyone.
Cass.
They weren't actually forcing anyone not to receive life-extending treatments.
Well, they were talking about how it's essentially good and natural to accept a limit to one's life.
They were talking about people accepting that for themselves. They weren't talking about forcing anyone to do anything.
Well, I disagree, because I've read some of their writings, and essentially there is a group of fairly prominent thinkers, people like Francis Fukuyama, who call transhumanism the most dangerous idea, and they see essentially this challenge to traditional notions of human nature to be very threatening to them. And it's threatening to them because it kind of undermines the whole edifice of culture that has been built up around rationalizations for death. So a lot of human culture, a lot of human decisions about their life paths are the outcome of people kind of reconciling with their own mortality over thousands of years. And over those thousands of years, during the majority of that time frame, it actually made sense for people to do that, to think that way, because technology was nowhere near achieving radical life extension. Even 200 years ago, life expectancies in most countries were in the 30s. So people could, at best, hope to live into their 60s and 70s if they really stayed away from most of the rampant perils that occurred in the world at that time. And yet they had to somehow persuade themselves to keep functioning, to keep striving for some sort of meaningful achievement in their lives.
Or they could travel the world and look for the elixir of youth, or some sort of thing in nature, like a fountain of youth or something, right? Like a lot of people did.
Yeah, some people did do that.
That's what I would have done. That would have been me.
Juan Ponce de Leon traveled to the New World, and he thought the Fountain of Youth was located somewhere in Florida.
Of course, he had little evidence for that.
Right. That was in your book, right? You guys talked about him in the book.
I didn't mention Ponce de Leon.
We didn't mention the Fountain of Youth. Some commentators on the book mentioned it in their commentaries. Like, of course, that was a critical commentary that they had, like, this is just the new Fountain of Youth, this is just an age-old human quest that existed ever since Gilgamesh, ever since Ponce de Leon, and well, it's true on the one hand that humans have always tried to overcome the problem of death, and they up to now have fallen short in that quest. However, and I hate to use the hackneyed phrase, this time is different, but I think I can justify it.
Well, because this time it's coming through the medical establishment gradually.
And it's coming through scientific progress. Exactly. It's coming through the fact that we've had amazing growth in biotechnology, amazing growth in the understanding of the human organism, and certainly we're nowhere near full or complete comprehension of how our body works, but it is now conceivable that with the electronic resources at our disposal and with the increasing body of biological knowledge at our disposal, we could solve this problem within our lifetimes.
I think that it's vitally important to avoid magical thinking, though. And that's what I was saying with regard to having the progress come through mainstream discoveries in the mainstream medical establishment, because that's how people like, not Fukuyama himself, I think he's a lost cause, but other people who are part of... Is everything okay?
That was my Skype. It was just making a weird sound. I was closing it down.
People who are part of the standard medical community will accept these ideas gradually. And it's because it's going to be piecemeal. It's because it's going to be grandma got a new heart 3D printed and now we can save her. You know? But really, I think that it's a bad idea to take the victim mentality or feel like life extension science is being lambasted or sidelined or anything by the mainstream medical community, because overall I don't think it is. We have massive numbers of scientists doing research on all kinds of problems, and they may not think of themselves as life extensionists, but in practice they are.
Yeah. I don't think it's a problem with science or scientists. I think it's a philosophical problem in mainstream society.
And it'll blow over as these people are able to access life-extending technologies piecemeal for themselves.
The question is how soon. And that I think it is an outcome of attitudes. We have so many great scientists, as you said, working on the problem. And even if they're not philosophically of the same view as we are, even if they're just in it to fight a particular disease, like they want to help cure cancer, they want to help cure ALS, they're still doing good work.
Absolutely.
And they're still helping. Now, how much funding are they getting? How much public support are they getting? How much resistance are they getting from politicians? Now, that's a philosophical issue. That's a function of the culture and
getting
its outlook.
Pushback. And I think that's great. And honestly, if I could minimize pushback for more of these sorts of scientists, I would. I just don't think there is much. Sorry, not minimize pushback, increase funding. I would like to increase funding for all these kinds of problems if possible, but I am not a billionaire. So
my view is when we start seeing, say, SENS get funding in the hundreds of millions of dollars a year, then we're going to probably not worry so much about reaching longevity escape velocity in our lifetime.
Well, I'm all in favor of funding SENS, like I said before. I think that's a good thing. But I would like to see, if I had $1 billion, I wouldn't give it all to SENS. I would diversify it among a huge, well, not a huge number, a moderate number of important research organizations to try to solve a large number of these sorts of problems. Because, like I said, I don't think there's going to be one pill. I think we're going to need to find separate solutions for separate problems and then solve all of them. It's a huge project. And that's fine, because we're still relatively young. If I were older, I would be feeling really nervous right about now.
Zoltan Istvan, he's, I think, 41 right now, and he was saying in an interview about a year ago about his book, The Transhumanist Wager, essentially one's view of morality is a function of how long one has to live. And he related a story that his father had his first heart attack at the age of 51. So Zoltan was thinking he has only about a decade left of possibly really healthy life with current technological possibilities. So he was really motivated to write this very radical, fiery, controversial book and get the message out and get this global conversation on transhumanism and life extension going, because he felt like his time was already starting to run out. And I'm not 41. Yes, there it is.
I'm still reading it. Have you read it?
Yes, yes, I've read it, and I've actually reviewed it as well. So you can find my review on the Rational Argumentator. You can also find it on IEET, the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. But this is a very important book, I think, in a way a cautionary tale about a path that we don't want human history to take, where there is a lot of resistance to transhumanism and life extension, and it essentially, without giving too much away, results in a world war of sorts.
I think the problem is, again, having it arise as one treatment from one source. I think that would receive a lot more pushback. It's kind of the frog in boiling water. You want to turn up the heat very gradually for something like this. My very favorite piece of transhumanist literature ever, I don't remember who wrote it, but it's a short story called The Gentle Seduction. Maybe you can pull it up, Gennady.
Sure.
But it's about, well, it's a love story, a short love story. Relationship where this woman and her boyfriend are on different sides of the transhumanist issue. Mark Stiegler. It was published in 1989. Mm-hmm. And he is a transhumanist, and she isn't. And gradually, the singularity begins to emerge. It's not all at once. And she finds herself becoming a transhumanist without expecting it. And she looks back, and it's just an absolutely beautiful, sweet story. And I think it's the best way that this sort of thing could arise. I think while we all want progress to happen overnight, having it happen slowly makes it more permanent, in a way. So.
Well, but if it happens too slowly, we're going to die.
Exactly.
Well, I understand.
I want it to happen in time for me. And
there is time, though.
Yeah, there would be time. I would hope. So Aubrey de Grey says there's a 50% probability of it happening within about 23 years or so with adequate funding. So 23 years from now, I would be 50. Now,
that's still not that old. I mean, 23 years, that's not going to be very old at all. See, again, I don't expect one threshold to be crossed. What I'm looking for is closer to longevity escape velocity, where we can gradually increase our expected longevity. So.
What do you guys think we need to do to really change the public opinion right now about death? Like, you guys have any other ideas? I personally, I've been a fan of using the idea of persuasion with fear. Kind of like your book, I think it's kind of similar in that nature. It kind of makes people question the fear they had of death when they were a child, right? And it says, well, that fear is natural, and it's good to have that fear. Mm-hmm. And then the second part of this question is, could you guys explain if you guys have fear, your reaction to fear of, your reaction to death when you were a child, and if you still carry some of that fear? I mean, you should. I mean, I think you guys probably do, right? But how much do you carry the same kind of emotional fear that you had when you were a child about
death? As I've said in response to this kind of question before, yes, fear of death definitely is something people should experience, just as fear of any bad thing, anything that would damage them, and death is the worst thing that could happen to an individual. Now, that's not why I wrote the book, though, and some media outlets have tried to represent the motivation for the book as being fear of death, but really it's love of life, because when one fears something, it's because one fears losing that value that is endangered by what one fears. So if one fears death, one fears losing that which death would deprive one of. So why would one fear losing life? It's because life is good. It's because
I completely agree with you. I mean, that's the way I view fear. I don't view it as this negative thing, right? Like, our culture has such a negative stigma on fear, but to me it just means if you fear something, it's just because if you fear death, it's because you love life. Like you said, like Why wouldn't you fear the opposite of what you love? If you love life, it just makes sense to fear death.
Well, there have been some good discussions on transhumanist risk aversion that I've seen recently. And I think it's very important not to be afraid to the point where your anxiety is altering the way you live your life in a fundamental way. You shouldn't let death make you live, the fear of death make you live less than you would have done otherwise. Do you know what I mean? If you're genuinely motivated by love of life, you should embrace it wholeheartedly. And yes, I mean, be risk averse. Don't ride on a motorcycle without a helmet. Don't smoke, 50 cigarettes a day or whatever it is. It's a terrible idea. You have to consider your long-term health and weigh risk factors. But if you're staying in the house all the time because you're afraid that if you walk down the street you're going to get hit by a car, I think you're taking it way too far the other direction. Life still needs to be about living.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of truth to what you just said, and I would also say that if the fear of death can actually paralyze you, it can actually prevent what you want to have happen. Like if you're too afraid of death that you just stay in your house all the time, like you said, Wendy, then you could actually prevent yourself from accomplishing and like going out and doing things and spreading the message of life extension, right?
Exactly, and you set a bad example to other people who you might want to persuade to be life extensionists. You want people to look at you and say, oh wow, you live really fully. I'm inspired by you. I want to understand why you think the way you do. I want to mirror your life in my own in some way. But if you're the kind of person who is frightened all the time, no one is going to want to mirror your life in their own. No one is going to want to use you as inspiration for their own philosophical, intellectual, or practical life. So.
Yes, I think the key is what is the best mindset for people to take action and to hasten the day when human beings' life expectancies become open-ended, essentially, because we've reached, well, but it would be longevity escape velocity, the idea that given how rapidly technology is advancing, if, say, you're 60 and biologically you've now been made more youthful, and you don't know anymore what the typical remaining life expectancy of a person your age is. That is, the historical life tables will not really be predictive anymore of the future. Right now they're still quite predictive. You could say at age X, what is your remaining life expectancy given the fact that you've survived to age X? So that's not the same as life expectancy at birth, because you haven't died for all the years that you've already been alive. So you're not statistically like a newborn anymore. So that conditional life expectancy, given the fact that you've reached age X, actually gives you a few more remaining years as compared to the life expectancy at birth. And over time, right now, with the rate of technological progress, we're adding about a quarter of a year to human life expectancies for every year that passes. So that's not longevity escape velocity. Longevity escape velocity would be when more than a year of life expectancy is added on average. Yes, for every year that passes. And that's not going to mean that everyone is indestructible. That's not going to mean that people will stop dying. It'll just mean however old one would be at that point, one doesn't have any more a sense of a fixed upper boundary. One could be alive 100 years hence. One could be alive 500 years hence if the trajectory of technological improvement continues. So that's what I think is important to advance, because ultimately, with the rate of technological progress accelerating, there will come about a day when that cumulative progress will kind of keep building on itself, so to speak. All the discoveries, all of the achievements and breakthroughs will combine to create an effect that nobody had foreseen. It's as Adam Ferguson, who was a great Scottish philosopher of the 18th century, said, a product of human action, but not of human design.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really human civilization. That's the economy that we inhabit, the market economy. That's the body of scientific knowledge that we can rely on. No single human being really knows everything that human science or technology have accomplished, but we use it, we benefit from it. Mm-hmm. And that's what I hope to see with life extension as well.
Definitely, and you've just reminded me that, one of the common arguments against transhumanism, against the idea of living forever, is people say, well, eventually some existential threat's just going to wipe out humanity, or there's just going to be the heat death of the universe, or just eventually some accident is going to kill you, right? But to me, as you said, like with the technology increasing over the millennia, over hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years, technology could get to such a great extent that we could create an ultra-safe, hyper-safe world, and even make everything so safe so that we can actually live forever. We could defeat all the different existential threats.
Yes, it would take time, but we're already moving in that direction. The world is safer now than it used to be. And we have on the horizon, say, autonomous vehicles, which could reduce auto fatalities by about 95% if they were universally adopted. We could have, say, nanobots repairing damage to tissues and organs. We could have, say, vertical farms that allow a very consistent crop yield without so much being subject to droughts and pestilence and other problems.
Well, if we have replicators, we won't even have to grow food.
And we could eventually get to that point as well. But yes.
I think that the argument that you were talking about, Rowan, I think it's important to address that as something that's philosophically unsound from the beginning. It's very easy to take a reductio ad absurdum of that argument and say, oh, well, I could be hit by a bus tomorrow, so I might as well sit on the couch and eating, 5 pints of Ben & Jerry's and 10 boxes of Twinkies and smoking all the cigarettes, and then I should go kill all the people I hate because I could be hit by a bus tomorrow. So there's no point in even trying anything.
Oh, that's a great segue into the next question I wanted to ask you guys, which is, so one of my favorite parts about the book was that you not only introduced people to the idea, children to the idea of indefinite life extension, but you also encouraged prudent living, avoiding risks and just being really safe and taking care of your health and your body. And I thought, in my review of your book, that was one of my favorite things. I'm like, that's awesome, right? Children aren't taught that enough, that, okay, we might only have one body here, so prudent living, stay healthy, stay safe, right? I love that. So I want to ask you guys, personally, what do you guys do as far as your prudent lifestyles? How do you differ from, what you see in the world, all these people who are careless? What are you guys doing that's different?
Well, neither of us smokes or drinks, and we try to exercise every day if we can. I do heavy lifting, which it's become kind of a thing these days, lifting heavy, squats, deadlifts, that sort of thing. And I was running outside, which was fantastic, but now I have plantar fasciitis in my right foot, which is terrible, so I'm sticking to the elliptical trainer for now, which is a lot better. And yoga, of course, which is so much fun. I don't go for the woo part of yoga, and there's a lot of woo in yoga, but it's fantastic for flexibility, for your ligaments and tendons and all that. So
I do a lot of running, as Wendy alluded to. We have an elliptical trainer, and it's a very sturdy commercial-grade elliptical trainer that we've placed in our living room. I have run ultra-marathons on that elliptical trainer up to 60 kilometers, which is 37.28 miles. 6.5. But it's really great because one can get all the benefits of that exercise without a lot of the hazards that come from running a marathon outdoors. Now, I'm fine with outdoor running for shorter distances, like 5 miles,
I really
even
enjoy it.
10 miles, but marathons come, in my view, with some risks, like risk of severe dehydration or weather shifts or cars.
And most official marathons, you've never actually run a marathon, and neither have I, but I have researched the possibility of running one in the future, have fixed routes where cars aren't allowed to go, so you don't need to worry about that.
Right. But what I'm saying is that there's a way to do it that is even more convenient in a sense, and technology facilitates that. I think one of the perhaps commonly overlooked advantages that we have now that even a generation ago people didn't have is how easy it is to exercise and do it in a way that's pretty much free of pain and free of unnecessary discomfort.
If you're smart about it.
Right.
Again, with anything, it's possible to hurt yourself if you're an idiot. And for me, it was important. In the past few years, I actually lost about 40 pounds from where I started. My highest weight ever was about 155, and now I'm at around 115. And that was really important for me. And it came as part of a realization that I was getting older. You know, I turned 25, and I was thinking, boy, if I don't, you know, get into decent shape now, it's going to be a lot harder in a few years. So I took it under serious consideration and started working hard, both at the weights and running on the elliptical trainer. And I started counting my calories, tracking my intake, finding out my BMR and my total daily energy expenditure, and eating in accordance with what I actually needed. I love the if it fits your macros approach. I don't do anything super restrictive. I'm not a vegetarian. I don't do keto. I'm not vegan. I think all of those are a little over-restrictive, at least for me in my lifestyle. So I just try to get enough protein and eat a reasonable number of calories, and I do eat mostly whole foods, like fresh vegetables and fruit and meat and so on. So.
Awesome.
Yes.
I'm proud of you. You guys both look really healthy, you know?
Thank you.
And we take gummy vitamins, but we're not big on supplements either, because there can be unexpected side effects with mega doses of a lot of different kinds of vitamins. So just hedge our bets with a low-dose gummy vitamin, you know?
Yes. I think definitely the body has certain daily requirements for vitamins and nutrients. I really don't see much of a point in significantly overshooting the requirements that are part of standard medical guidance. I tend to be fairly conservative in my own approach to health. That is, if some practice is generally accepted as either healthy or harmful, then I would respectively either pursue it very wholeheartedly or avoid it entirely. For instance, we know statistically the behavior that's most likely to shorten a person's life expectancy is smoking cigarettes. So that's definitely top on my list of activities to avoid.
I think the vaporizer is a great invention for a lot of people who are currently smokers. And of course, smoking is way down from where it was 20 years ago, so it's not nearly as much of an issue. But I would strongly encourage anyone who is still smoking analog cigarettes to switch to digital cigarettes, not only because they're cooler and come in a ton more flavors, but also because it's probably a lot better for you than inhaling smoke, to inhale the flavored water vapor.
And better for everyone around you.
Yeah, it doesn't stink up the place. So.
Yes. Other health-related decisions or risk-related decisions, no extreme sports for either of us. Regular sports are fine, just not the...
You're not going to lava board down a volcano the way Zoltan did?
That's Zoltan. I would be more risk-averse than that myself.
I wouldn't rule out the possibility. I am a little less risk-averse than Gennady is. I'm more of a natural adventurer. But something like Burning Man. I would love to go to Burning Man someday.
We should all go together. I want to go to Burning Man. That'd be fun.
But Gennady cannot be persuaded. He will not go. So
I love the amenities of civilization too much, and my preference really is to use the amenities of civilization to increase human well-being, and that includes safety, but that also includes opportunity. So we can do a lot here, for instance, having this conversation, even though we are a couple hundred miles away, and yet again, our parents' generation, when they were our age, did not have that benefit. And it's amazing to see how much technology can improve human well-being. So I'm the kind of person who definitely does not want to return back to nature or to the way things used to be.
Don't think of Burning Man as a hypernatural location. I get the impression that it's a strange mix of the tribal and the hyper-futuristic.
Yeah, I think a lot of people come very, very prepared, you know, with their RVs, and it's pretty much like you're in a city, you know.
So, but Gennady has a rule about flush toilets. There has to be a flush toilet for him to go to a place.
Yes. Well, one expression that I like to use is the measure of how civilized a place is can be seen by the quality of the sanitation system in it. And you can see that throughout both human history and in various societies, various environments within the world. The more amenities there are for sanitation, generally the higher the other, shall I say, metrics, indicators of civilization and culture.
I don't know if that's entirely true. Because didn't the Romans have some measure of flush toilets?
They did, yes.
But there were not flush toilets during the Enlightenment.
Actually, they were invented during the Enlightenment.
Not until late.
In France, 1770s, I
yes,
think.
but they weren't in wide usage during the Enlightenment at all. I would say that there were more flush toilets in ancient Rome than there were during the Enlightenment. So I think that breaks your rubric.
Well,
but I don't think that a flush toilet is a perfect
correlation.
metric. Okay.
It's a strong correlation. And definitely today, if you take a snapshot today of various places, various societies, and their sanitation systems, you'll see a clear correspondence. So,
would you describe yourself as like kind of a germaphobe? I'm a germaphobe personally, so I'm just curious.
I don't think that's it exactly. I think it's more a matter of personal comfort.
Yes, I mean, we all want to keep clean, I think, and we don't want to expose ourselves to harmful microorganisms. There's an amount of germs that every one of us gets exposed to on a daily basis,
and if you didn't,
just
you would
as
be
a
much worse off.
function of living, and that small exposure can help the immune system. But again, it's a question of getting that balance right.
Yeah, like you know, if you touch a public doorknob, you know, you don't know who just touched that. Like it could, you know, they might have like not washed their hands after they went to the bathroom or just something.
I mean, it's a possibility, but I've done it literally hundreds of thousands of times, and I'm fine. So it doesn't bother me. I don't think about that on a daily basis.
All right, so now here's an interesting question. I got to ask this question. It'd be a shame not to ask it.
Sure.
Fill in the blank. If you could just say, death is wrong because, and you know, 1 or 2 or 3 sentences, very concise. Just death is wrong because.
Death is wrong because life is right. And
ooh, nice.
And it would be a travesty for life, which is essentially the source of everything that is good and anything good that we can pursue to end. That would be just a complete moral disaster.
Well, I was going to say death is wrong because I didn't choose it, which I think works well. There is an implied "for me" in there, and I think that goes back to my comment at the beginning that I think we should focus on making death optional rather than making life mandatory. I do think eventually people are going to, some of them want to, even if they've lived 900 years, you know, 10,000 years, some people are going to want to choose to hit an off switch. And I think that that's fine, and that option needs to be available for some people. I think always having an off switch be a possibility will make people a lot more comfortable with the idea of extending life expectancies. Because you get a lot of people who, for some reason, think you're going to be trapped in this indestructible, hell-like, you can never escape from your existence sort of thing. You hear people say, oh, immortality would be a nightmare, you'd be so lonely, there would be the heat death of the universe, and then there would just be nothing. And that's not at all what we're talking about. That's a strange thought experiment that maybe somebody performed on them once, that they got confused with indefinite life extension. It's not the same thing. We're never going to be indestructible.
Right.
There will always be a certain number of people who die either because they choose to or because there was an accident.
However, I do think that over time, people would have the choice to end their lives or allow their lives to end, but fewer and fewer people will make that choice.
Yes.
Because they will see essentially an increasingly better future with increasingly more opportunities.
Right.
I think the argument that, oh, people would get bored if they lived a certain amount of time is completely fallacious, because the pool of available actions to take or available experiences or knowledge that we can pursue only expands, and it expands at a much faster rate than we can actually make use of those experiences.
Yeah.
So, for instance, about 2.2 million books get published every year, and if you read one book a day, that would be 365 books that you read each year. The number of books, new books that you haven't read, will continually increase at a faster rate than you're able to read them.
I think a good example for how people might gradually accept life extension and fewer of them will choose death can be seen, for example, in blood transfusions. When blood transfusions were initially invented, people were, of course, very reluctant. The idea of taking someone else's blood into your own body is a horrifying prospect if you're unaware of the science behind the idea. And now, of course, it's standard practice, except for a very few people who object on usually religious grounds, like Jehovah's Witnesses. And even they are, in some cases, coerced to allow their children to accept a blood transfusion, for example, because the child will die otherwise. So I think it'll be sort of like that. It's an idea that might seem unusual to people at first, but will gradually become accepted. Again, because it's going to come piecemeal, like a 3D printed heart, or a 3D printed eye, or a 3D printed esophagus, or whatever 3D printed organ someone needs in order to live. Initially, there will be this, I wouldn't even quite call it fear, but people are uncomfortable with things that are new and unusual. But there's also something shiny there, the idea of having an organ made from your own cells, custom grown for you. So it is your kidney in a sense. It's just your extra kidney. It's really amazing. And I think people will largely appreciate these sorts of things.
I think another thing is that a lot of people are really worried that these technologies are only going to be available to the very rich people. And that's why they're really not getting on board with it, is because they just assume that it's not going to be available to, like, your average person.
Well, that's the case with every new technology, and eventually it becomes available for the masses. You saw it with cell phones, for example. In the 1990s, cell phones were these horrible, huge, awkward bricks, and only very wealthy businessmen carried them. And these days, everybody has, a little tiny disc, not disc, a rectangular prism with them. And it's smaller than a disc, and it's amazing how easy access is to a device like that now. I mean, kids have cell phones, an 8-year-old school kid might have an iPhone. It's the funniest thing. So I think we're going to see the same thing with relative speed with life extension technologies. And it's not going to be posited as life extension. And I think this is such an important thing to recognize. It's going to be posited as a new treatment for Parkinson's, a new treatment for cancer, a new treatment for ALS, a new treatment to reverse cell degradation. And people aren't necessarily going to think of it as life extension. And that's fine. They don't need to think of themselves as life extensionists in order to help. So.
Yes, I definitely agree that people don't need to think of themselves as life extensionists in order to help. I'll add that the adoption rates of technologies continue to increase. So, for instance, it took a very long time from the discovery of electricity to the time when 50% of American households had electricity. It took more than half a century for that to happen. It took about 40 years for that to happen with the telephone. And with computers and the internet, we've seen it happen a lot faster. And with cell phones, we've seen it happen even faster.
Yes, with computers and the internet, it was about 30 years. And I'd say with computers. And with cell phones, it's been like 15. So.
Yes, and we've seen other technologies, say portable MP3 players, where they didn't even exist in the year 2000, and now that's universal, though.
I'd also point out that the earliest adopters, that is the very wealthiest people who have the first access to this technology, will have the crappiest form of this technology. Like the first cell phones were absolutely terrible, you know? They were these enormous, clunky devices. The first people to receive blood transfusions probably didn't get the best blood transfusions. The first people who got cars didn't get cars nearly as nice as the cars we have now, nearly as safe, nearly as feature-filled, etc. So, yes, the very wealthy will be the first people to have access to any technology, but they're also guinea pigs,
yes,
in a sense. They are the people taking a risk on a new technology and perhaps suffering for the early failures of that technology so that people who are less wealthy later on can have an improved version of it.
It actually relates to an argument that I've made about why we should want life extension to arrive sooner. I don't want to be part of the first generation to receive life-extending treatments.
Well,
I want to be part of the second or third generation. But I mean, say, the SENS therapies that Aubrey de Grey proposes, for instance, therapies that could break down the extracellular protein crosslinks, or that can, for instance, get rid of some mitochondrial mutations. Those therapies, I would rather have people 1 or 2 generations before mine receive these treatments first, and I hope they all succeed. I'm really hoping that whenever those treatments come online, the success rate would be phenomenal to begin with, but we have no guarantee of that.
You know, you're worried that they might be dangerous? Like you want them to be the lab rats?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so by the time it becomes medically necessary for me to get some of those treatments to extend my own life expectancy, some of the glitches would be worked out already, and they would be more reliable. They would be more conventionally accepted and have more of a conventional success rate rather than the success rate and correspondingly the failure rate of very experimental treatment.
Right. I want it to be routine by the time we get there for somebody to put a 3D printed liver in me or whatever it is. You know, I want that to be standard practice the way appendix removal is today.
Right. And if we have to be the first generation, it's better than dying.
Right. It's better than being the last generation before that was available.
Right. But this is why I want indefinite life extension to occur for as many people as possible, no matter how old they are right now. I mean, if it happened 1,000 years ago, that would have been wonderful too. But from the present vantage point, the more people that can be saved through the advancement of technology, the better.
I think you just need to watch for blowback, because it is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable for religious or other reasons right at first, if it doesn't come on slow. And again, I really recommend that short story I mentioned to you, The Gentle Seduction. My favorite piece of transhumanist literature that I have read. And it's not long. You know, you could probably read it in 20 minutes.
Okay. Awesome. All right, I have another fill in the blank for you guys.
Sure.
Because these are going to be great. I can make quote pages of these. Okay, so think seriously now here. I am an eternal life fan because, or I want to live forever because. Fill in the blank.
I want to live forever because the good things in life can never end. There will always be more wonderful opportunities to pursue.
Well, mine is more specific than yours, and you're so good at these grand statements. I want to live forever because I want to travel the stars. You know, maybe I grew up watching and reading too much science fiction, but I want an enterprise, a serenity, something like that. I don't want a Galactica.
Guess what? I have a quote. I have a quote of yours. Let me read your quote. I selected a favorite quote of each of yours, okay? And I want you guys to comment on each other's quotes. So let me start off with my quote of Wendy's that I gathered. Okay, here it is. It's just what she was saying, okay? If we can, oh wait, so that's a different quote than I had. Okay, she said, if we can inspire just one child, who knows? That child might change the world. Okay, so Gennady, you comment on that quote.
Sure, and that's absolutely true. Throughout history, there have been great breakthroughs that were essentially made possible because of one person.
Antibiotics.
Yes, Alexander Fleming, or say Isaac Newton and his laws of motion and the calculus.
Oh,
the
calculus.
There was the whole thing with Leibniz, but Newton actually did it a little bit earlier.
Yeah, but if he hadn't done it, Leibniz would have done it.
But and then we have, say, Aristotle with his system of logic and his system of philosophy, which really laid the groundwork of a lot of Western thought. And so one person can make the difference.
Well, Norman
between,
Borlaug is my favorite on this. In terms of one person making a difference in terms of a sheer number of lives. Do you know who Norman Borlaug is?
Mm-mm.
Look up his Wikipedia page. He is an amazing man. He invented genetically engineered wheat and corn that was drought resistant and allowed a huge number of people to survive who otherwise would have starved to death in third world countries. The discoveries of this one guy, Norman Borlaug, favorite guy. I love that guy.
So if we can inspire that one person who creates a major breakthrough that will increase life expectancies and improve human health, then this will all have been worth it. And writing this book and spreading it and talking about it will have paid more than any sort of return one could reasonably expect from a business enterprise.
Well, we're certainly not making any money on the book.
But we want to change the world, and that's really the goal.
We want the world to change, and if we can be part of that, that's what we would like best.
We can change the world with ideas, you know. That's what we got to do.
Well, as my alma mater likes to say, ideas have consequences.
And ideas are bulletproof. That's awesome, you know? You can't kill an idea.
That's true. You can't stop the signal.
All right, so now I'm going to share one of Gennady's. This is one of my favorite quotes of Gennady's. And when I say it's Gennady, right?
You can say it either way. The Russian name has the hard G sound. So
it's okay if I say Gennady?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So this quote was actually sourced from your response to my ice video challenge, and when you said it, I'm like, yes, I love this. Okay, so you said, wait, so maybe this wasn't sourced from that. No, I think No, this was a different place I sourced it. But anyways, you said, at age 5, I promised that I would devote my life to the struggle against senescence and death. Age 5! That is awesome. So that's really inspirational to me, that at age 5, you already were thinking like this. So Wendy could comment on that.
Well, I didn't know Gennady when he was 5, clearly. But I met him when he was 18, and I could tell from the moment I met him that he was that kind of eccentric, that kind of unique and strong personality, who knew who he was and where he stood in the world and where he wanted to stand. And that's one of the things I admired about him from the beginning, and that I still admire. I have, I think, softened him in certain ways. He used to be a little abrasive, I think it's fair to say. And he's told me in the past that he doesn't think if we had met when we were 9 or something, that I would have liked him when he was a kid, that he could be a hard one to get along with. But I think you're charming, and I think you would have been adorable as a 5-year-old crusading against death.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I've always tried to keep true to the vision I had as a child of what is good and right. And I always try to be the kind of person of whom the child me would have been proud. If the child me had met the adult me, I hope that that child's impression would be a favorable one.
Oh, I think it would be.
Well, thank you.
So right now I have a few questions that were sourced from Eternal Life fans.
Great.
Stefan Tobin asks, how much does death scare you? I think we might have already covered this, but
all right.
How much are you actually scared of death, you know?
Well, I'll tell you the truth, even though the fear directly isn't what motivated the book. There's nothing that I'm afraid of more than death, because anything else implies you're still alive and you can still do something and you can still enjoy life in some way. You can still make a positive difference in some way. Where there's death, there's nothing. So
where there's life, there's hope.
Yes, yes, exactly. So I would say the answer, and that's a true answer, is I am more afraid of death than I'm afraid of anything else.
Yes.
Well, ditto. I agree. I am for sure.
I would say my answer is a little different from Gennady's. I don't live day to day thinking about death and how afraid I might be of it. I don't feel that on an emotional level, probably because I'm not thinking hard enough about it day to day. But like we were talking about earlier, I don't think living with that kind of fear lurking in a corner of my heart would be good for me in terms of how I want to live my life. On an intellectual level, yes, I would love to defeat it because I want to live as long as I possibly can, because there's so much I want to do in life. I embrace this love for life. But if I were to die, well, it would be a tragedy for Gennady and those around me. I wouldn't exactly be aware of how horrible it was after that point.
But that's the problem.
I'm aware of that, and it would be terrible for Gennady if I died. And clearly it would be terrible for me at the moment directly before I died, knowing that I was about to die, if I knew. And I don't want that to happen. Right now, sitting here not in that danger, I don't want that to happen, obviously, more than I don't want anything else to happen. It's the thing I want to happen least. But I'm not afraid of it in the same sense that Gennady describes being afraid of it, because if it did happen to me, it would be horrible for him more than it would be horrible for me, in a sense. It would be horrible for me sitting here right now, but after it happened to me, I wouldn't be aware of how horrible it was for me at that point, because I wouldn't be aware of anything. It's very much like the how how I did not exist before I was born, I would equally not exist after I died.
Yes. Do you give a small percent chance that there is any kind of consciousness after death, or are you just like, no, definitely not?
Well, that's an extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I have seen no evidence for that claim from any tradition. So
yes, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see how consciousness, which is an emergent property of the physical body and physical brain, can survive the destruction of the physical body and brain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't rule out the possibility that a non-biological entity could one day be conscious. For instance, an artificial intelligence,
that's absolutely going to happen.
Right, or even some sort of hybrid biological and artificial brain. So, friend of mine and fellow life extensionist Franco Cortese has written about the possibility of gradual mind uploading, where essentially over time individual biological neurons are replaced with artificial neurons, and over time you could have, provided that there's that continuity of experience and you don't just destroy the original and make a copy, you might have a fully artificial brain that still has the same consciousness, the same I-ness, so to speak, but you can't do that just when the body is destroyed. And because what would there be? There would be, in my view, no disembodied soul that kind of floats away and leaves the body and hangs out somewhere and maybe waits to inhabit a different body or goes to a different world. There's just nothing in the laws of nature that would accommodate that.
I completely agree. Yeah, on the afterlife, it's just complete. I always say, you know, anything related to gods or afterlife, it's all just complete hypothetical conjecture. So when people accept death on the grounds of there being some kind of afterlife, it's just like that's a big gamble to take.
Exactly.
And on mind uploading, I think comment on this. So I think people are just too over optimistic that mind uploading is some kind of way to live forever. Other than what Franco Cortese says. Am I saying that word? Am I saying his name correct?
Yes.
Franco
Cortese. It's
Cortese.
C-O-R-T-E-S-E.
His idea is much better, right? Definitely. But this idea that people think that they're going to live forever through mind uploading, but to me it seems like it's just a copy of the person and not their individual person, right?
Yes. It's not the same persistence of consciousness. Actually, as much as I love Star Trek, I have this problem with the Star Trek universe, that every time someone uses a teleporter, the individual being teleported is being destroyed and then replicated. It's not the same person who comes out the other end. Have you ever seen the movie The Prestige? This is a prestige problem.
Yes, I have.
It's the same thing with the Star Trek teleporters. The original is killed, and a copy is put in its place.
Interesting.
And
yeah, I agree
Star
with that.
Trek while thinking about that is creepy as hell. Now, I want instant travel from one place to another, but it's going to have to come in the form of a portal gun, rather than in the form, well, not a gun necessarily, but portals that you can step through, rather than dematerialization and rematerialization. Because breaking someone down atom by atom and rebuilding them inherently destroys the original, and I don't think there's any continuity of consciousness there. Though I have heard some Trekkies make the argument that since you're stored in this pattern buffer in between, and there's an episode of Original Trek where two people are actually having a conversation being teleported together while they're in the pattern buffer, that the continuity of consciousness persists, but I don't think it's internally consistent.
Yes. I think in terms of views of identity, what constitutes oneself, there are really two different schools of thought. One is this patternist school of thought, which kind of just wishes away the problems with mind uploading, at least destructive mind uploading that we discussed.
Mind uploading is cool, by the way. It's neat to be able to have a record of yourself like that. But it's not the same thing as your current self persisting.
Definitely. Like to me, it's very similar to the concept of symbolic immortality through leaving a legacy, right?
Yeah, it's like that.
It's just not real. It's not the real thing. It's fake. It's not, you know.
Well, no, I mean it can be neat. It can be important, and I wish that some great people of the past had had minds uploaded in some way. Like, imagine if Mozart had been able to upload his mind, and then you could craft an artificial intelligence for this Mozart personality to inhabit. So you could have a virtual Mozart.
Yes. But
that would be amazing.
That would be good for us, and that would be good for the virtual Mozart if he were sentient, but it wouldn't be good for the original Mozart because the original Mozart would be oblivious to
My
all
point
of this.
is simply
I agree with that, yeah.
Superior to not having
right.
that. That's my only point.
Yes, and I agree with that. So the other view, and this is the view that I espouse, is the physicalist view, that you need to have a continuity of physical structure, and you can have changes within that physical structure. For instance, we do have the cells, the individual cells in our body die and replicate. We take in a lot of matter from the outside world, and we lose a lot of matter as well.
But it's a ship of Theseus thing.
Yes.
Replacing it piece by piece, it's still in a sense the same ship, even if every piece has eventually been replaced with something else, as long as there's that continuity. So fill me with nanomachines, replace all of my cells with tiny engineered robots of some kind, replace all of my neurons with cyber neurons. And as long as you do it gradually enough, I will still be the same me. But if you do this mind uploading thing, or this brain preservation where you make a copy of the brain and the original brain is destroyed, I think the person is dead in that sense. And the brain preservation people will say, oh, it's okay, it's you because it's the same pattern. This is the patternist school. I don't think it's you in the same sense, any more than a photo of you is you. It is you, but it's not all of you.
Right. It's just essentially an artifact of your presence in the world.
Exactly.
And it might be a good artifact as long as it doesn't destroy the original you. The problem is when mind uploading ceases to become just making a copy in some sort of non-invasive way and would become invasive, like the whole premise of the Brain Preservation Foundation is to make very thin, microscopically thin slices of a person's brain and scan them and then try to eventually reconstruct a mind from that. But one, there's no guarantee that that's going to preserve everything, but two, it's not going to preserve the original subjective continuity of the person whose brain got scanned. And once your brain is sliced up, that's it for you.
Yep.
All right. Another question from an Eternal Life fan, user D8D8 on YouTube. He asks, ending aging is more important than world hunger, ALS, AIDS, NASA, U.S. wars, and yet no one cares. Okay, how do we get ending aging the attention it deserves?
I think that's a very important question, and it's one reason why I wrote Death is Wrong. I think the problem is one of essentially an obsolete cultural outlook encountering new technological possibilities that most people haven't thought through yet and haven't realized that they are realistic within their lifetime. So there's a twofold conundrum, and it kind of builds on itself. On the one hand, many people think indefinite life extension is not feasible. On the other hand, they think it's not desirable. And when you really press them in either one of these areas, they'll shift to the other. They'll say, oh, yeah, you might have convinced me that it might not be such a bad thing to live a long time, but you're just a utopian dreamer because it's never going to happen in our lifetimes. Or you've succeeded in convincing me, maybe, that we could get to it if a lot of resources are devoted to it, but it wouldn't be a good thing anyway because overpopulation, boredom, evil dictators living forever, and it's not natural, it's playing God. So one or the other of these pillars needs to fall, and we need to chip away at both of them at the same time. We do have great researchers working on these problems. Aubrey de Grey and his SENS Research Foundation are one excellent example. Google's Calico,
I'm super excited about Calico.
Just announced a new massive research initiative into drugs against cancer and Alzheimer's disease is another example. Craig Venter's company, Human Longevity Inc., is another example of that. So people are working on chipping away these arguments against the feasibility of indefinite life extension. I think those of us who have some ability to articulate philosophical arguments, moral arguments, need to chip away at the arguments against the desirability as well. And over time, we can break that feedback loop. This is why Death is Wrong is so important. It tries to touch on both of these issues. And I start with the desirability side of it by relating my own experiences as a child, by relating something that kids could identify with. And if they could recognize, I'm not the only one who have these thoughts. There are other people who think like this. And here are the arguments they've come up with. And then, oh, there are some people working on this problem already. There have been achievements in radically extending the lifespans of fruit flies and mice and worms. And now Aubrey de Grey has this 7-pronged approach to achieving similar gains in humans. That's something I think that for a young mind could really break that undesirable feedback loop where many adults say, oh, it's not feasible and not desirable, and if you try to persuade me against one of these positions, then I'll just dig into the other.
Right. Well, my answer is, again, a little bit different. I think that that person is posing a false dichotomy. I don't think it's a zero-sum issue. I think that progress on a lot of these issues will go hand in hand. And I think that funding one will help all, inevitably, over enough time. If you look at something like NASA or SpaceX or space travel, that's going to be vitally important for us if we're suddenly able to live 1,000 years. We need to be able to travel to other planets, moon colonies, outside of the solar system, whatever it is. We need to be able to become a multi-planetary society in order to preserve our durability and to have enough space and resources, because if people aren't dying, we know that they're not going to stop breeding all at once. Birth rates will decline, but new people are still gradually going to continue to exist and come into existence. Something like ALS. There's really relatively little point in saying, oh, I want to live to be 1,000 years old, but by the time you hit 50, you have ALS. You need somebody to fix that for you so that you can go the rest of those 950 years, you know?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
It's not just one issue. And yes, there is this public perception problem where people don't realize the feasibility or the desirability, the way Gennady said. But yeah. I think that as you have people getting to age 80 without Alzheimer's, without ALS, without cancer, suddenly it will seem a lot more feasible and desirable. And these people might want to leave the planet. And NASA, SpaceX, whatever else exists would definitely help with that at that point. So I think that that person is seeing a false dichotomy where one does not exist.
Well, I will add, though, that person does identify some aspects of tremendous human investment and time commitment, like war, which we can do without completely.
Today.
And actually, war is so tremendously destructive,
and expensive,
not just
and wasteful,
of lives, but of the infrastructure that can make human lives better. Think about Ukraine and what is happening over there right now, where entire regions of Ukraine are just being devastated. And what was not the most prosperous country in the world, it was a second world country riddled with a lot of corruption and a lot of suboptimalities.
It's been set
people,
back 30 to 50 years.
People did manage to eke out pretty decent lives there for the most part, but their homes have been destroyed. Their infrastructure has been destroyed. They don't get electricity or water. Yes,
destroyed.
And their political system has been co-opted by warmongers, essentially, who want to kill people and encourage people to die for nationalistic ideals that have no bearing or relevance to human life.
On that, I think it's important for us to become cosmopolitan, citizens of the cosmos, rather than jingoistic citizens of one particular country. You know?
Oh, I definitely agree. Wasn't it Socrates who said, I'm a citizen of the planet, or something like that?
I don't know.
Somebody said, I'm a citizen of, it's the idea of, right, a cosmopolitan, right? Where it's not, don't be nationalistic, don't be so patriotic. We're all humans on this planet. We're all interconnected. We're all just as important, you know. Just because I'm in America doesn't make me more important than, you know, someone on the other side of the world.
Sounds like something from Pale Blue Dot, that amazing Carl Sagan book.
Cosmopolitan is derived from
Citizen
the Greek
of the
for
cosmos.
citizen of the universe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
So
that's why I chose that word.
Yes.
I'd like, Gennady, can you plug your series of videos that are about war? I loved them, and I think this would be a good opportunity. I'm in complete agreement with you about war, and just plug, what were your video series entitled? I know you had a whole series on YouTube about this.
It's a two-part series with some images as well as my narration. I created it in 2010, a complete denunciation of war.
That was it. I loved that. That was really good.
Thank you.
I think that was the best video I've ever seen on war and why war is so horrible.
Mm-hmm. And it details some of my own intellectual transformation on this issue, because as much as I'm ashamed to say it now, I actually supported the Second Gulf War when it was beginning to be underway in 2003. Yes, because I thought it was a war against a really evil tyrant who had no respect for human life and who was murdering his own people by the hundreds of thousands, and that's true, that he was an evil tyrant. However, the majority of the damage in that war was not done to Saddam Hussein or the people who abetted him. It was done to a lot of innocent civilians, millions of innocent civilians who lost their livelihoods, many of whom lost their lives, and now we see very clearly as one of the consequences of this war, there's an even worse threat in that part of the world. ISIS,
yeah.
Who, unlike Saddam Hussein, aren't even bound by the strictures of a government. At least Saddam Hussein, tyrant though he was, kind of was constrained in what he could do just by the fact that he was a national leader who had to put up a certain front.
Well, and he seems to be a little more of a modernist than the ISIS thugs who would like to revert to centuries ago.
But the fact that there was this massive American intervention in Iraq against a clearly immoral dictator and an immoral regime led to an even worse nemesis like ISIS being able to arise. So another reason why war needs to be rejected is even the best intentions in starting a military intervention can have severe unforeseen consequences that are worse than the original problem that war was launched to solve.
So do you have any more questions for us?
Yes. User Alpha asks, he asks, I can hardly imagine anyone else more qualified to be parents than you two. Do you have or do you plan on having any offspring in the near future? It's a good question. I want to know too.
We have cats.
We have two cats, yes, who are very pampered and very sweet, loyal creatures.
They are non-human persons.
Yes, we certainly treat them that way. Now, as for human offspring, my outlook on that is similar to Aubrey de Grey's. He's said there are many people in the world who are qualified to have kids, who would be good parents, but there's only one person in the world who can do what Aubrey de Grey does, and the kind of contribution he hopes to make to the world requires him to essentially devote the vast majority of his time to that effort. I like to think that both Wendy and I have something unique along those lines to offer to the world. So it's a question of opportunity costs. If we were to have children, that would be a huge time commitment. It would be a huge amount of money, effort, energy put into raising those children well.
And as the woman who would be bearing said possible future children, that's rough on the body. You know, I want to live as long as possible, and bearing a child comes with a huge number of risk factors, as well as permanent alterations to my organism, which is the only organism that I have. So, well, I haven't ruled it out entirely, and if somehow I ended up pregnant, we would probably go ahead and raise the child. We have no intention at present of having children, but appreciate the compliment.
Fully respect that. So here's a personal question. You guys did the Kickstarter for Death is Wrong. You must have gotten lots of different responses and different stories of. It was a very successful campaign. So could you share any? Was there any exciting stories that you got from that? Like, did any schools participate, or libraries, or anything like that?
We did have some schools and libraries participate. We had a school teacher in the UK essentially use the books. He got a shipment of 100 books, and he provided them to the students in his class as part of a lesson about life extension research and SENS and Aubrey de Grey. So
and there was a
that
librarian,
was nice.
too.
Yes, there was a librarian, Jameson Rohrer, who has a blog called The Transhumanist Librarian. He essentially got me in contact with his fellow librarians throughout the U.S., and not only did he personally place some books in libraries, but he also enabled me to send books for libraries in Nebraska, Iowa, Hawaii, other states as well. So we now have a pretty decent sample of libraries that carry the book.
Well, and
Excellent.
also a variety of small societies and organizations, and some not so small, requested and received shipments of the book, which was exciting.
Yes.
There was a society, the Armathwen Society
Yes.
in the Netherlands.
They received 120 books, and they were giving them out in the Netherlands. It's very nice that the books have now quite a presence in Europe. We had a Polish teacher receiving the books. We had another person in Poland receiving some books, and
There was a Russian recipient, I recall.
there was one in Ukraine, our translator, who translated the books into Russian. We also sent him some of the Russian editions that he translated to
and we
put
have
in
Russian and
libraries.
Spanish translations available now for free.
So we've had both of them were volunteers, translators, coming forward and just offering their services to create the Russian and Spanish language editions, and we welcome that for any other language that a person wants to translate the book into. That would be excellent. We always are just absolutely overjoyed when we have the ability to spread the book to a new audience.
That is definitely an awesome thing. I mean, what a great book for children to read. I mean, I can't think of a more important book for a child to have.
Well, I have to say, when Gennady came to me with the idea, I expected it to be more of a narrative, and I would like to do another book in the future that is more of a storybook and less of an educational primer, because I think it would be for a different demographic. You know, the educational primer is important and useful, but I think that there are people who are better moved by a good story than by a list of facts, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So here's another question from an Eternal Life fan. Brad Arnold asks on the Facebook page, he said, would you settle for a full-body prosthetic? he said, i.e., ghost in a shell, if living eternally in your own body wasn't possible yet. So did you guys get that question?
Yes.
As long as there was a continuity of consciousness, I wouldn't mind.
Right.
I have no objection to becoming a cyborg or eventually an android with a meat brain, or having my meat brain gradually replaced by a nano brain or something like that. I have no objection to augmentations of the cyber variety.
Yes, as long as my I-ness, the sense that I have of being me and not somebody else, it's also commonly referred to as subjective continuity, is preserved through whatever transition occurs, then I would be fine with it. I think if it's a whole body prosthetic, and if Mr. Arnold means by that also that the brain becomes some sort of artificial brain, then there would have
a meat brain in a robot body.
Yeah, then as long as there is a smooth transition that doesn't interrupt that vantage point that I have, and that would be tricky from an execution standpoint, but assuming it's possible, in principle, I wouldn't object to it.
Cool. All right. Next question, and we're getting to the end of the questions from Eternal Life fans. This Eternal Life fan is curious, what are your future goals in fighting aging? Maybe a book for adults in the works? Question mark.
Well, as I mentioned, perhaps another children's book with more of a narrative slant to it. Tentatively thinking about something like "The Future is Awesome," you know, a positive book instead of one that says "Here's what's bad, you should be scared of it." But
or how about Eternal Life is Awesome?
I think that sounds a little. I don't know. I don't want to.
Immortality is awesome.
That might be. Life is awesome, something like that. But I don't want.
Good. I like that.
Words come with a lot of baggage, and I don't want people thinking, "Oh, this might be a Christian book. This might be a religious tome." I wonder if you get that at all with the Eternal Life fan club. If people think, "Oh," because Eternal Life has a lot of Christian implications.
You're right. And the word immortality has a lot of baggage I don't really like. I actually did a protest recently with the immortality sign. But the thing about the immortality and eternal life, the part I don't like about those words is that it can imply to people that it's like a guaranteed thing. Like you've got your immortality, and it's not like that. Eternal life is I always tell people eternal life is never a sure thing. It's a process that lasts forever. You can never, even if we live for billions of years, you can never be sure that your eternal life isn't going to be taken from you if you die, right?
It's funny. It's like if you said 95% of people who wash themselves with soap are stinky 24 hours later, so why would you ever bother washing yourself with soap? Because you're just going to stink again soon, you know? You have to continually make an effort.
Exactly.
It's not just, and then it's the same thing with staying healthy. You know, it's not just a one-time thing. It's a continual choice, a continual series of decisions. So
definitely, yeah. So, I guess I use the word eternal life. I mean, I do come from a religious background. I wasn't always an atheist, so I started out with being fed these ideas of I'm going to get eternal life and a heaven and all that stuff. Yeah. And I carried some of the word usage with me, into my transhumanism phase. But were you guys ever raised religiously at all, or you guys were raised completely
Gennady wasn't.
Agnostic or atheist?
I grew up in Texas, so that should answer that question. My family wasn't ever, and I'm lucky, they weren't ever fundamentalists. They were kind of culturally Christian. And I would say they're still softly culturally Christian, even though they don't go to church. I don't think they pray, but living in Texas, you're surrounded by that 24/7, and it's easier to just kind of go with the flow in terms of what everyone around you believes than it is to take a step back and say, yes, I'm going to set myself apart from those around me in this very difficult philosophical way. And it is hard if you come from a place like the Deep South or Texas or the Midwest, where people are still predominantly very religious. Fortunately, we live in Nevada now, which is not a particularly religious place by comparison. Maybe it's the hookers, maybe it's the medical marijuana, maybe it's the gambling, I don't know. But people here tend to be a little more earthly.
Well, as Wendy said, I was never raised in a religious household, so during the days of the Soviet Union, officially the regime was atheist, and a lot of people just did not practice any sort of religion. I think many people were still philosophically religious, they just tried to hide it, but my family was actually among the true atheists, the people who didn't think there was a God. For generations, they were atheists. So I was raised in a non-religious way. They weren't hostile to religion. There wasn't a lot of militancy about it among ordinary people, but it was more of just a respect for science and a respect for evidence that I was raised with, and I was essentially able to realize from a very early age that there just isn't any evidence for the supernatural. So one has to make the best of the world that one can, given the laws of nature and given the fact that those laws of nature can be understood and applied in a systematic way. Now, in terms of future plans, I will say I want the impact of the ideas of life extension to be spread as far as possible through my work, and if that means additional writings, that would be great. If that means continuing to build upon the impact of Death is Wrong, that would be great as well. As I've said, I always welcome translation efforts, and I would work with any volunteer translator to help get the translated version out to market. There may also be some computer games motivated by the book coming out. So
nothing big. When you say computer game, people imagine Skyrim. And it's not going to be on the scale of Skyrim. It'll be some little indie efforts.
Right, but it would still be another way of communicating these ideas. I like to support other life extension projects. I have helped the MILE, the Movement for Indefinite Life Extension, with attempting to build up a support base for these ideas. So I've helped the MILE advertising fundraiser essentially gather some money to run Facebook ads to expose more people to the movement, and we helped the MILE meet its goal at the end of its second year of getting 8,000 Facebook supporters. So I'm going to continue to do that. I've been helping out Longevity a little bit with their Folding at Home team. They have a Folding at Home team called the Longevity Meme, which actually has been in operation for many years, and I'm trying to motivate more people to join it, to devote their idle computing power to essentially calculations that can help scientists understand how various very complex proteins fold and interact, and this understanding could someday help develop cures for diseases like Alzheimer's disease, cancer, AIDS, and others.
I see. All right, so now I'm going to ask a personal question. I was raised with a religious background, and now I'm an atheist, and I'm going around telling people they should doubt the afterlife, and, you know, don't be so certain of this because there's no proof of an afterlife. When you die, it could be the end of your entire existence. I kind of like repeat these same slogans all over the place, but in a way, your book is also kind of against religion in the sense that it's saying death is wrong, and religion preaches that death is right? Because religion says, well, when you die, you get to go to heaven and afterlife. So what do you want to say to people who really strongly are convinced that there's an afterlife? What would you tell them?
I would tell them essentially, if I can't shake their belief in an afterlife, I would tell them, inspect the moral code of your religion a bit more closely, because pretty much every religion will have, for instance, a moral prohibition against suicide. So if it's wrong to terminate this life, why would it be wrong to try to prolong it, irrespective of whether or not there's an afterlife? And really, my intention isn't to deconvert anybody from a religious position. I actually think that's much harder to do than to convince people to support indefinite life extension. I would challenge them instead to try to find a compatibility between the two. What if the afterlife isn't the stereotypical vision that they have of the soul leaving the body and floating off to some other realm? What if the view of heaven that's expressed in Christian theology is actually the world that we could achieve here with transhuman technologies?
Well, there are actually Christian sects that believe in a physical resurrection. So I don't see that as...
Like Jehovah's Witness.
I don't see this as too far removed from transhumanism, if people want to look at it that way.
Right.
I mean, Jesus was resurrected after he died, so why can't people continue living their physical lives and then maybe ascend to space, if that's how you want to interpret it?
Yes.
But I think there's going to be a lot of alteration of the way that theology is parsed, religious interpretation. Rather.
Yeah, and Jesus said, "He who keeps my saying will never see death." So if you take that literally, he's saying, look, if you're really keeping my saying, then you're not going to die.
Well,
that's how I take that.
You could make some argument to people who believe in the rapture that it's kind of hand in hand with the singularity, and that people who do not accept the singularity will, in a sense, be left behind technologically.
That's interesting.
And theologies have evolved dramatically over the centuries and even over the past few decades. Really, it always astounds me when some fundamentalist Christian will tell me, the thinking that this fundamentalist Christian espouses is exactly the same as the thinking of the original Christians. And I'm wondering what, say, the Christians who were martyred to the lions in the Colosseum in the 60s CE, or the Christians in the 3rd century CE would think of this fundamentalist Christian today. They would probably think, wow, this is a pagan, hedonist lover of luxury who doesn't understand what it means to really be spiritual and really sacrifice for God. And they'd be right from the standpoint of their theology, but this fundamentalist Christian of today most likely accepts automobiles, airplanes, computers, heart surgery, yes, antibiotics, all sorts
tattoos,
of food that these 3rd century Christians would have rejected as being too luxurious.
There's a prohibition on shellfish in Leviticus.
So theologies do evolve, and I think religion is going to be with humankind for a long time. We're not going to have everybody becoming an atheist over the course of a generation or even a century, but the way people will interpret their religions will change dramatically, because mostly the vast majority of people are going to try to find some way to reconcile themselves with technologies that have become sufficiently ubiquitous, and that's the key. If the technology is strange to them, if it seems far out to them, they'll try to find reasons to reject it. But if it's everywhere in the world around them, and they can see some obvious advantages, like people can see obvious advantages to the internet or cell phones, then they'll try to make peace with that technology.
Definitely.
Approaching the end of the questions?
Yeah, I think we're about almost to the end of the interview. Probably shouldn't go on too long. We could always do this again.
Yeah, sure.
I want to give you guys an opportunity to plug your websites and anything you want to tell the Eternal Life fans.
Absolutely. So my principal website is the Rational Argumentator. That's rationalargumentator.com. It is an online.
Yeah.
It is an online magazine that I have created and that I have been the editor of for over 12 years now. And this is essentially the central hub for all of my interests, including life extension, but also economics, philosophy, current events, musical composition, mathematics. I have a variety of articles, educational study guides on there that people can peruse. Also, my YouTube channel, that's youtube.com/GStolyarov G Stolyarov II, includes hundreds of my videos, including playlists about eliminating death or the impacts of life extension, or my musical compositions as well, which I've been gradually turning into videos. So people can find out a lot about my work from those sources. Death is Wrong has a Facebook page, facebook.com/deathiswrong. You can also find it through a Facebook search, and that's where I post a lot of updates about the book and any exposure that the book has been getting, including the great exposure that the Eternal Life Fan Club has been providing for it.
Thank you.
How
And
about you, Wendy?
all of my art is accessible from Gennady's pages. You can find links. I have an artwork folio page with some of my art. I have a SoundCloud page. I do voice acting, which is a lot of fun. And you can find links to both of those. The URLs aren't.
wendystolyarov.artworkfolio.com.
And then soundcloud.com/Wendy Stolyarov. So if you're really curious, I have that stuff there. But mostly you can find my stuff off of Gennady's page. So.
Awesome. I got some Death is Wrong book giveaways that you're going to love. They're going to be coming up. I went to a Comic-Con convention, and I gave them to kids at the Comic-Con convention, so I got that on video. You guys are going to love it.
I saw the one you uploaded. It was super cute.
Yeah. Are you guys fans of, like, Comic-Con? I think I might have seen a picture of you dressed up as, like, you were doing a cosplay, Wendy.
Yeah, I was doing Esri Dax from Deep Space Nine.
Cool.
She's a Trill with the markings down the side of the face and neck. Goes all the way down, actually. Anyway, yeah, there's a Reno Comic-Con coming up in November that we'll be going to, for sure.
Oh, so. Cool. You guys planning on giving out some Death is Wrong books and doing anything like that?
We're not having a booth. We're just going to consume,
yes.
I think. But it should be fun. William Shatner is going to be there, and he's a life extensionist.
Oh, cool.
You know that?
Yes,
Awesome.
he actually takes quite a bit of an interest in life extension, and
he wants to live forever.
It shows. He's past 80, but he looks to be in his mid-60s.
Yeah, he's aged really well. I don't doubt that there's some amount of plastic surgery there, but Leonard Nimoy might be there too. It's not confirmed, but he lives at Lake Tahoe, so I wouldn't be surprised if Leonard Nimoy made an appearance. Several of the Firefly people are going to be there, which should be fun. And Reno hasn't really had a Comic-Con before, so I'm excited. Yeah.
I might want to go to this. I think Reno's only 2 hours away from like where I live in Sacramento. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, it's just a drive over the mountains.
When is this? I might want to go.
November 21st through the 23rd, I think. And it's not that expensive. A three-day pass is like $70. So not too bad for a con.
Well, I could probably get a press pass. I got a press pass to the convention in Sacramento because I had a video camera.
Oh, that's smart.
It'd be cool.
Do it.
Excellent.
I might want to do that. Okay, cool. Might get to see you guys there.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure interviewing you guys. You guys are delightful people. I think you guys are one of the best, people in the life extension movement. I'm so happy with this book. I mean, the world needs your book. So.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure interviewing you.
Indeed.
Likewise.
Have a great weekend. Good talking to you.
Great talking with you. Bye.
Goodbye.